Single mom saves a stranger. Next day, her life is completely different. The security camera at Westlake Park captured it all, a young woman in a waitress uniform running toward the lake, kicking off her shoes as she sprinted, the splash as she dove into the frigid water, and moments later, her emergence, dragging an unconscious man to shore where she immediately began CPR. What the camera couldn't record was the whispered prayer on her lips as she fought to save a stranger's life, or how this single act of courage would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just her own struggling existence, but the lives of everyone around her. Because Emma Parker had no way of knowing that the man she pulled from the lake was someone she'd already met, someone who had been searching for her for 15 years, carrying a debt that could never be repaid and a promise that would change everything. If you're already feeling the pull of this unexpected connection between two strangers whose paths were destined to cross, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us how a single moment of bravery can ripple outward in ways we never imagined, and how sometimes the people we save end up saving us in return. Emma Parker was exhausted. At 34, the single mother had perfected the art of functioning on minimal sleep, stretching every dollar until it screamed, and maintaining a cheerful demeanor through it all for the sake of her 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Today had been particularly grueling, a double shift at Rosie's Diner followed by 3 hours of online classes for the nursing degree she'd been chipping away at for 6 years. Now, as she cut through Westlake Park on her way home, all Emma wanted was a hot shower, a cup of tea, and maybe 20 minutes with her latest library book before collapsing into bed. She'd be up again at 5 a.m. to get Lily ready for school before her morning shift. The park was nearly empty at this hour, just past 10 p.m. on a Tuesday in early October. The air had a crisp bite to it, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of the first frost. Emma pulled her thin jacket tighter, quickening her pace. Mrs. Abernathy from next door was watching Lily, but Emma hated imposing on the elderly woman any longer than necessary. She was halfway across the park when she heard it, a splash, followed by a strangled cry for help. Emma froze, scanning the darkness toward the small lake that formed the park's centerpiece. At first, she saw nothing. Then, in the dim glow of the park lamps, she spotted movement in the water, arms flailing, then disappearing beneath the surface. Someone was drowning. Emma didn't hesitate. Dropping her backpack and kicking off her shoes, she sprinted toward the lake, her waitress uniform hardly appropriate attire for a rescue mission. The rational part of her brain registered that she should call for help, but there was no time, and no one else around. The shock of the cold water stole her breath as she dove in, but Emma pushed forward, swimming toward the spot where she'd seen the struggling figure. The lake wasn't large, but in the darkness, with the water's surface now still, it was difficult to orient herself. "Hello?" she called, treading water. "Where are you?" "Nothing." Taking a deep breath, Emma dove beneath the surface, her hands outstretched, searching blindly in the murky water. On her third attempt, her fingers brushed against fabric. She grabbed hold and pulled upward with all her strength, breaking the surface with a gasping breath. The man she'd found was unconscious, his face pale in the distant lamplight. Emma wrapped one arm around his chest and began swimming backward toward the shore, her muscles screaming with the effort of dragging his deadweight. By the time she reached the shallow water, Emma was shaking from cold and exertion. She dragged the man onto the grassy bank and immediately checked for breathing and a pulse. Finding neither, she began CPR, grateful for the training she'd received in her nursing courses. "Come on," she muttered between compressions. "Breathe. Please breathe." After what felt like an eternity but was probably less than a minute, the man convulsed, water spewing from his mouth as he coughed violently. Emma turned him onto his side, relief washing over her as he began to breathe on his own. Only then did she fumble for her phone, miraculously still in her pocket, to call 911. "Emergency services, what's your situation?" "I need an ambulance at Westlake Park, near the north shore of the lake," Emma reported, her voice steadier than she felt. "Adult male, approximately 40 years old, near drowning victim. He's breathing but unconscious." As she gave the dispatcher details, Emma finally took a moment to really look at the man she'd rescued. He was well dressed in what had probably been an expensive suit before its lake immersion. His dark hair was graying at the temples, and even unconscious, there was something distinguished about his features. What had someone like him been doing in the park at this hour? And how had he ended up in the lake? The questions would have to wait. In the distance, Emma could hear sirens approaching. She stayed beside the stranger, monitoring his breathing and keeping him on his side in case he vomited more water. She was vaguely aware that she was soaking wet, shivering violently in the October night air, but her discomfort seemed trivial compared to the man's condition. When the paramedics arrived, Emma stepped back, suddenly self-conscious in her dripping uniform. She gave them a concise report of what she'd found and the care she'd provided. "You did good work," one of the paramedics told her as they loaded the man onto a stretcher. "You saved his life. Will he be okay?" Emma asked, hugging herself for warmth. "Thanks to you, he's got a good chance. Are you all right? You should get yourself checked out too, that water's freezing." Emma shook her head. "I'm fine. I just need to get home and warm up." "At least let us give you a blanket," the paramedic insisted, retrieving a silver thermal blanket from their supplies. "And you should really consider getting checked at the hospital. Hypothermia is no joke." "I really can't," Emma said, thinking of Lily waiting at home and the cost of an ER visit she couldn't afford. "But thank you for the blanket." As the ambulance pulled away, Emma gathered her scattered belongings, backpack, shoes, the dignity she'd left on the shore when she'd plunged into the lake fully clothed. Wrapped in the silver blanket, she began the long walk home, her wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. By the time she reached her apartment building, Emma was shaking uncontrollably, her teeth chattering so hard she worried they might crack. The elevator was out of order, again, so she climbed the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment, leaving a trail of lake water behind her. Mrs. Abernathy opened the door at Emma's knock, her kind face immediately creasing with concern. "Good heavens, child. What happened to you?" "Long story," Emma managed through chattering teeth. "Is Lily asleep?" "Out like a light. But you need to get out of those wet clothes immediately. I'm running you a hot bath." Too exhausted to argue, Emma allowed her elderly neighbor to fuss over her, gratefully sinking into the steaming bath Mrs. Abernathy prepared. As warmth gradually returned to her limbs, Emma replayed the events in the park. She had saved someone's life tonight. The thought was both exhilarating and surreal. After her bath, dressed in warm pajamas and wrapped in every blanket she owned, Emma sat at her small kitchen table with Mrs. Abernathy, who had insisted on making her tea and toast. "Now," the older woman said firmly, "tell me what happened." Emma recounted the evening's events, downplaying the danger and her own role in the rescue. But Mrs. Abernathy wasn't fooled. "You could have drowned yourself," she scolded, though her eyes shone with pride. "Jumping into that lake in October. What were you thinking?" "I wasn't thinking," Emma admitted. "I just reacted." "Well, you're a hero, whether you admit it or not." Mrs. Abernathy patted her hand. "That man owes you his life." "I just hope he's okay," Emma said, yawning. The events of the day were catching up with her, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. Mrs. Abernathy insisted on staying the night on the couch, concerned about Emma's condition. Too tired to protest, Emma checked on Lily, sleeping peacefully, unaware of her mother's adventure, before collapsing into her own bed, where she immediately fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, Emma woke to the sound of Lily moving around the apartment, getting ready for school. For a moment, she was disoriented, her body aching in places she didn't know could ache. Then the memories of the previous night came flooding back, the lake, the rescue, the ambulance. She glanced at her clock and bolted upright. 7:30 a.m. She had overslept by more than 2 hours. "Lily," she called, her voice hoarse. Her daughter appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her school uniform, her dark hair neatly braided. "Morning, Mom. Mrs. Abernathy said to let you sleep. She made me breakfast and everything." Emma smiled gratefully. "That was nice of her. Is she still here?" "No, she left after she made sure I ate. She said to tell you she called the diner and told them you were sick today." "She what?" Emma was fully awake now, panic rising. "Lily, I can't miss work. We need the money, and Jerry's already cut my hours this month." Lily's face fell. "But Mrs. Abernathy said you were a hero last night. Heroes get days off, right?" Emma softened, reaching out to pull her daughter into a hug. "It's complicated, sweetie. Being a grown-up means sometimes you have to work even when you don't feel great." "That's a stupid rule," Lily declared with the straightforward wisdom of a 10-year-old. "Can't argue with that," Emma agreed, forcing herself out of bed despite her protesting muscles. "Let me throw some clothes on, and I'll walk you to school." "Already handled," Lily announced proudly. "Mrs. Abernathy's grandson is taking me. He's waiting downstairs. She said you should rest and that she'd be back to check on you later." Emma was torn between gratitude for her neighbor's kindness and anxiety about the chain of decisions being made without her input. But Lily was already backing toward the door, clearly eager to leave. "Okay, but straight to school, right to class, and I'll pick you up at 3:30, Emma instructed. "I know the drill, Mom," Lily said, rolling her eyes good-naturedly. "Love you. Feel better." After Lily left, Emma sank back onto her bed, her body reminding her forcefully of last night's exertions. Every muscle ached, and her throat felt raw from the lake water she'd inevitably swallowed. Maybe a day of rest wasn't such a bad idea after all. She was contemplating whether to call the diner herself when there was a knock at the door. Assuming it was Mrs. Abernathy returning as promised, Emma wrapped herself in her robe and shuffled to answer it. But it wasn't her elderly neighbor standing in the hallway. Instead, she found herself face to face with a tall man in an impeccable suit, his dark hair graying at the temples, his face hauntingly familiar despite the circumstances of their last meeting. "Ms. Parker?" he asked, his voice deep and slightly raspy. "Emma Parker?" Emma nodded, speechless. It was the man from the lake, looking remarkably well for someone who had been unconscious and not breathing less than 12 hours ago. "My name is Thomas Grant," he continued. "And I believe I owe you my life." Emma stared at him, 1,000 questions racing through her mind. How had he found her? Why wasn't he in the hospital? And why did his name sound vaguely familiar? "You should be in a hospital bed," she said finally, her nurse's training overriding her confusion. A smile flickered across his face. "I checked myself out this morning. Against medical advice, I'll admit, but I had something important to do." His expression grew serious. "May I come in? I won't take much of your time, but what I have to say is, rather personal." Emma hesitated. Under normal circumstances, she would never invite a strange man into her home. But these were hardly normal circumstances, and something about Thomas Grant's manner, respectful, almost deferential, eased her concerns. "Give me a minute to change," she said, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. "You can wait in the living room." 5 minutes later, dressed in jeans and a sweater, her hair hastily pulled back, Emma joined Thomas in her small living room. He stood examining the photos on her bookshelf, mostly of Lily at various ages, with a few of Emma and her daughter together. "Your daughter?" he asked, gesturing to the photos. Emma nodded. "Lily. She's 10. She has your smile," Thomas observed, before taking a seat on the couch at Emma's invitation. Up close and in better lighting, Emma could see the toll last night's events had taken on him. Though well-dressed and composed, there were shadows under his eyes, and a pallor to his skin that spoke of his recent trauma. "Mr. Grant," she began. "Thomas, please." "Thomas. I don't mean to be rude, but how did you find me? And why are you here? He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew her waitress name tag. You dropped this by the lake. When I regained consciousness in the hospital and heard what had happened, I asked the paramedics for any information about the woman who saved me. They mentioned your uniform and that you'd lost your name tag. He paused. Tag. You dropped this by the lake. When I regained consciousness in the hospital and heard what had happened, I asked the paramedics for any information about the woman who saved me. They mentioned your uniform and that you'd lost your name tag. He paused. Finding your address was, admittedly, a bit more complicated, but I have resources at my disposal. Emma wasn't sure whether to be impressed or concerned by his determination. That still doesn't explain why you're here. Thomas leaned forward, his expression intensely serious. To thank you, of course. But also because I believe our meeting wasn't entirely coincidental. He hesitated. Ms. Parker, Emma, does the name Grant Memorial Hospital mean anything to you? Emma frowned, the name triggering a distant memory. It's where Lily was born. But it's called Westside Medical Center now. It changed names years ago. Thomas nodded. It was renamed after my father sold it to a healthcare conglomerate. The Grant family owned and operated that hospital for 3 generations. Okay, Emma said slowly, still not understanding the connection. 15 years ago, Thomas continued, a young woman came into our emergency room. She'd been in a serious car accident, a hit and run. She was 8 months pregnant and in critical condition. Emma's breath caught in her throat, memories she'd long suppressed suddenly rushing back. The screeching tires, the impact, the terrifying hours that followed as doctors fought to save both her and her unborn child. That was you, Thomas said softly, confirming what her expression had already revealed. You were that woman. How could you possibly know that? Emma whispered. Because I was there that night. Not as a doctor, as the administrator. My father was transitioning ownership of the hospital to me, and I was working late, reviewing files in my office, when they brought you in. His voice grew quieter. The doctors weren't optimistic. You needed emergency surgery, but the specialist who could perform it was at another hospital across town. I made the call to send our helicopter for him. Emma remembered fragments of that night, the chaos, the pain, the desperate fear for her baby. But she had no memory of Thomas Grant. The surgery was successful, Thomas continued. You survived. Your daughter survived. It was something of a miracle, according to the medical team. I know, Emma said. The doctors told me afterward how close we both came to dying. But I never knew about the helicopter, or any of this. Thomas smiled faintly. There would have been no reason for you to know. It was simply part of running a hospital, making decisions that sometimes meant the difference between life and death. He paused. But I never forgot you. Your case was one of the last major decisions I made before the hospital changed hands. I often wondered what happened to you and your child. Emma was struggling to process this information. So last night at the lake. Complete coincidence, Thomas assured her. I had no idea the woman who pulled me from the water was the same one whose life I'd helped save 15 years ago. Not until I saw your name tag and something clicked. He shook his head, a look of wonder crossing his face. Life has a strange way of coming full circle, doesn't it? It does, Emma agreed, still trying to absorb the remarkable connection between them. But I still don't understand why you're here now. You've thanked me, which wasn't necessary, and explained our past connection. Is there something else? Thomas's expression grew more serious. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion into your privacy, he continued gently. But when I recognized your name, I needed to know what kind of life you were living. I discovered you've been working 2 jobs, studying for a nursing degree for 6 years, raising your daughter alone. Emma stiffened slightly. If this is about charity. It's not, Thomas interrupted softly. It's about balance. He stood and walked toward the window, collecting his thoughts. 15 years ago, I made one decision that saved your life. Last night, you made one decision that saved mine. But here's the difference, Emma. I had helicopters, doctors, resources. You had nothing but courage. The room fell silent. Thomas turned back toward her. I've spent years building hospitals, foundations, and businesses. But I've never forgotten that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who have the least. Emma swallowed. What are you saying? I'm saying, he replied, his voice steady, I want to finish what I started 15 years ago. He reached into his briefcase and placed a folder on the coffee table. Inside was a full scholarship confirmation for her nursing degree, tuition paid in full. A trust fund established for Lily's future education. And an employment contract offering Emma a position at Grant Medical Foundation, once she graduated, with a salary she could hardly comprehend. Emma stared at the papers, her hands trembling. I can't accept this, she whispered. I didn't save you for money. I know, Thomas said. That's exactly why you deserve it. Tears filled her eyes, not from pride, not from shock, but from something she hadn't felt in years. Relief. For 15 years, Thomas continued, I carried the memory of a young woman fighting to survive on an operating table. I wondered if she made it. I wondered if her child was safe. I never imagined that one day, she would pull me from the water. His voice cracked slightly. Emma, you don't owe me anything. This isn't repayment. This is destiny correcting itself. Emma covered her mouth as tears finally fell freely. All the nights of exhaustion. All the bills. All the fear of failing Lily. All the quiet prayers whispered when no one was watching. And now this. Why were you in the lake? She asked softly. Thomas hesitated. My wife passed away last year. I come to that park sometimes to think. I leaned too far on the dock. It was an accident, but if you hadn't been there. He didn't finish the sentence. Emma nodded slowly. 2 lives. 2 separate tragedies. 1 unexpected collision of fate. I don't want to be rescued, Emma said quietly. I just want a fair chance. Thomas smiled gently. That's all this is. A fair chance. At that moment, the front door burst open and Lily rushed inside, having forgotten her homework. She froze when she saw the stranger. Mom? Emma wiped her tears quickly. It's okay, sweetheart. This is Mr. Grant. He's an old friend. Thomas knelt to Lily's level. You must be the miracle, he said warmly. Lily blinked. What? Thomas smiled. Never mind. Just know your mom is the bravest person I've ever met. Lily grinned proudly. I know. Emma laughed through her tears. For the first time in years, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. 1 year later. Emma Parker stood in a crisp white nurse's uniform at Grant Memorial Foundation, which Thomas had renamed in honor of his father and quietly dedicated a new pediatric wing to a second chance at life. Lily thrived in a new school, confident and happy. Emma no longer worked double shifts. No longer counted every dollar in fear. No longer wondered if life would ever give back what it had taken. And Thomas? He found something he thought he'd lost forever. Purpose. Because sometimes, the life you save doesn't just survive. It returns, stronger, to save you. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because one small act of courage can change everything, and you never know whose destiny you might be stepping into.